ADHD is highly functional. The people in our survey, 500-person survey, very successful entrepreneurs with revenue exceeding $20 million and all this kind of stuff. Highly successful people, 60% of them identified with ADHD traits, where in the general population it's like 10 or 12, right? So they have these traits that lend themselves very uniquely to...
Welcome everyone to another wonderful day, to another wonderful podcast with another clueless Eli. As yet again, I do not have a clue what this gentleman is here with us for, but this is where the conversation comes into it, and it always makes for good conversation. And we have with us today John Torrens. Is that correct, John?
That is correct.
It is. I'm terrible with surnames, so I'm glad I got your surname correct. But John, thank you for your time. Thank you for coming here today. And as always, I'm going to do the boring thing, and I'm going to ask, what do you do to help people be successful in your business? And we'll go with the flow.
Sure. Yeah, so I do a number of things. I've got two main roles that I play. The first is as a professor of entrepreneurial practice at Syracuse University's Whitman School of Management. We're a top-ranked entrepreneurship department in the U.S., and I work with students on their new ventures. I teach electives, coach student startups, and that sort of thing. Super fun. I love it. That's where I get a lot of my energy. I get to work with really creative, smart young men and women, and it's just an amazing part of my career. And then the other part of my life is as a business owner, operator. I run a therapy company that works with young children with disabilities. So kids usually birth to 5 years old with speech, physical, or occupational therapy needs, special ed needs. We have outpatient clinics, the home health program, and we have integrated preschool where half of the children have disabilities, half the children are typically developing. So I'm in a really cool spot where I get to run a business and everything that goes along with that. And then I also teach about business and startups and scaling and exits and that sort of thing. So I feel that one part of my life resonates with the other, and it's a really nice way to be.
Do you know what? That sounds beautiful, because there's a lot of people that do business, but they do it for the sake of making money, or they're doing the job because they fell into it. And you obviously purposely, at some stage, and I'm not saying it happened, and this is where we're going to find out your story, right? I'm not saying it from the beginning, but you've ended up at least putting the two together, as you said, and you're doing something that you have a passion for. So when you wake up, your life is dynamic and you've always got a smile on your face. Well, I shouldn't say always, but majority of the time you've got a smile on your face.
Right. Yeah. So I was an entrepreneur first, and I had sold my business for the first time back in 2008. And that was the point at which I started exploring a pathway in a university setting, and was lucky enough to get connected with Syracuse University. It's just such an amazing institution. And was offered a full-time job there after being an adjunct for a couple of terms. And then I had the opportunity to buy part of the company back after a year, and I did that. And then it was kind of a long and curvy path, but I ended up having both. I didn't really want to give up the business because, as a business owner, it's hard to give up that income. University professors, it's a great living, but not exactly like owning a business. So I didn't know which one I would give up if I had to. And luckily I didn't have to give either one up. They worked really well together. And it's been a true blessing to be able to do both. So to be able to practice the things I teach in my classrooms in my actual business, and also to be able to share, stories of successes and especially failures with my students. So it's they really amplify each other really well.
So what made you go down the route with helping disabled kids that need the support and help? You could have gone in a completely different situation. You could have just helped, it could have been adults who came from a certain point of view. It could have been any other situation, but you've focused on literally helping the needy kids, I shouldn't say needy because they have their good skill sets at the same time, but you specifically have gone in that direction. So what made you do that?
Well, I went to graduate school to be a speech language pathologist or a speech therapist. So that was my professional training as a youngster or as a young man. And then when I got out of graduate school, I had a job that I didn't really enjoy all that much. Doing speech therapy in a setting that I didn't find that fulfilling. So I just left and started my own practice, just solo practice, billing myself out by the hour. And I loved it. I thought this was really amazing. I get to do the work that I like to do. But then I realized, pretty quickly that my income was going to be limited to the number of hours in my day. And all of a sudden that didn't seem all that cool. If I wanted to take vacation or take a day off, I don't have an income. So, I was lucky to have some friends who were successful entrepreneurs, even though we were young at the time. And one of them suggested to me that, well, why don't you just hire somebody to help you? And having no business background at all, that seemed like an impossibly daunting task. So how do you hire somebody? How does that even work? Right? Just the simplest of things now was a major obstacle back then. Of course, I figured it out, and I hired one person, and then the next, and the next, and between 1995 and 2008, I went from 0 to 250. Probably a few more than 250 employees, 6 locations, and so on. And, had an opportunity to exit the business. That's how I ended up doing that. I could have worked with adults, but for whatever reason, I just, when I was working with young children and their parents, that just filled me up a lot more, as a young parent myself, you know what it's like when your child needs help, right? And it was just very fulfilling to be able to do that for children and to be able to help the parents, help their own kids. So that's how we ended up doing that.
Okay. Now, also, you're ADHD, are you not?
I sure am. Yeah.
And were you lately diagnosed or were you early diagnosed?
No, I was diagnosed in my 40s. So I was, I was growing a company, and for somebody with ADHD, it's the early stages of scaling a company, or that's where we shine, right? And I've done some research in this area. I can share with you. I wrote a book on it as well. But yeah, that's where we do our thing. Things are a little bit chaotic. We're just assembling the resources we need. We don't have policies and procedures yet. We're just going for it. Just growing. So I was doing that, and I remember sitting around my little conference table at my office with maybe 6 to 8 employees I had at the time, and it struck me that they were all counting on me, knowing what I was doing for their incomes and their livelihoods. And that really scared me. So I went back up to the university and I said, hey, can I just take an accounting class? Because I knew nothing about accounting. I mean, I was the very stereotypical technician who became a business owner, right? Like an accountant. Well, actually, accountant maybe knows a little bit more about business, but like say a dentist, a chiropractor, a massage therapist, whatever, right? That was me. Didn't know anything about business. And they tried to talk me into an MBA. And I didn't want a second master's degree. I already had one. So I did what any logical human would do, is I went for a PhD program in business. And I learned a lot about business. But the reason I wanted to do that was because I needed to know a little bit about business, because I felt it getting away from me. So if you fast forward a few years, we were scaling, we were growing 100%, 200% a year. It was exciting for me, very exhausting for my employees who don't share my neurodiversity. So I remember one time, again, sitting around the conference room, and I don't even know what we were talking about, but it was very important. And, I was working with an executive coach at the time, and I kind of debriefed this episode with her. And she's like, have you ever seen a psychiatrist? Maybe you've got ADHD. And I said, yeah, maybe, who cares, right? So anyway, my employees came to me and said, hey, we heard you were thinking of maybe talking to somebody about your ADHD. And it was at that point, I'm like, okay, that seems pretty clear to me that maybe I should talk to somebody. So yeah, I went and talked to the psychiatrist. We did the full evaluation. They got, I had to write home, get all my report cards from elementary school and review them. And I mean, it was clear, right? The psychiatrist said, look, you didn't just develop ADHD. You've had this your whole life. Look at all the comments on your report cards, right? If John would just focus, he's got so much potential, but he fools around too much. He doesn't get his work in on time. He shouts out answers in class, doesn't raise his hand, all those things you might expect. Yeah. And then I thought, wow, all right, so this is me. This is how I'm wired. And then certain things start to make sense about the way I operated, or the way I sometimes created chaos when none existed, just because that's where I felt comfortable, not realizing the impact on my employees, or not realizing the way I was showing up for my employees when I was, having rushed energy or not focused or whatever. So yeah, it was later in my career, and I'm thankful that I did, because it helped me just sort of reframe a little bit the way I approach my work, and more importantly, the way I approach my employees and my relationships.
And is it a situation also that, how do you feel if you found out earlier on if you were ADHD? Do you think it would be a situation where it would hold you back because you were put in a box, and so you will think, oh, I can't quite do that? Or do you think it could have helped you from a point of view that you would have a different standpoint how to tackle certain situations within the business as you went along?
That's a good question. And of course, I don't know for sure, right? But I would guess, so based on the experience both of my children had, we got them diagnosed much earlier. So it didn't surprise me when I noticed some of the same symptoms in them.
Oh, so it was your fault, John. So it's always the man's fault. So
yeah. But it's interesting because they're both in business for themselves. They're both highly impulsive. All the things that are helping them as early stage entrepreneurs are also the things that could get in their way later. But they understand that. They've seen it in me. Yeah. I think if I was diagnosed earlier, perhaps it would have helped. Although in my generation or my era, there wasn't an awful lot of sympathy or support, right? It was just, you're difficult. Maybe I would have been medicated because it was easier for the other adults in the room, to deal with me, right? I did actually go the medication route. I tried a few different meds, but I didn't feel that they were for me, and I chose other ways to manage my symptoms. But yeah, it's hard to tell. I know the education system in the U.S. isn't really designed for neurodiverse populations, and it's not the teachers' fault. They're overworked. Their classrooms are big. Even though they want to differentiate education and meet each kid where they're at, the truth is they just don't have the time or resources to do it. And even the best intentioned teachers are at a disadvantage when it comes to that. Yeah. So yeah, I'm not sure how it would have worked out for me. And I'm just kind of grateful that it worked out the way it did. And I am where I am now.
No, I hear you. I mean, it's the same in England. So I'm in London, and the education system, I don't think anywhere in the world is really built for people being different, be you neurodivergent or not. It's built in a specific way to do specific things.
Right.
Especially at our age, it was a difficult time. There was stigmatism, being ADHD or dyslexia or autistic, etc. So who knows what would have happened? Who knows what would have happened if we'd known earlier? But what I am curious about, you said you tried a couple of meds that didn't help with the meds, but you tried alternative things. Now, what were those alternatives to help you forge forward in a positive way?
Yeah, so I looked at it from the perspective of consumption. Like, what am I consuming? Food, media, information, right? Everything that I'm consuming. And then also, what am I doing? So what's coming in and what's coming out. So I took a pretty deep dive on the consumption part first. So it's true, or what I've learned is that there's not too many things you can add to your diet to help you with your symptoms, but there's plenty of things you can take out of your diet to help you, right? So removing, red dye number 5, for example, not getting involved with a lot of central nervous system stimulants early in the day, avoiding sugars, a lot of things that are just healthy in general that help your entire body and all the systems also help your neurological system. So I was able to manage that. I don't drink as much alcohol as I used to. I hardly drink at all, only because I know it affects my sleep architecture in a really negative way. And that sets me up for a complete lack of success the next day. So manage my alcohol, manage my food intake. I also manage the media that I take in. So I used to be the guy that had 3 screens up. I had my Messenger app, my stock ticker, I was just being bombarded with information, right?
You are a gadget man, really?
Yeah, right. I know it's shocking to hear that, but it's true. I was. I still am to a degree, although now we're in a meeting, right? So this is the only screen that's open, and this is the only thing I'm doing, right? So I try to manage my consumption of information and media. I don't watch news in the U.S. anymore because it's just it's the same thing. It's frustrating. So I choose what to do. Then on the with the output side, I make sure that I have a movement practice every day. I live part of the year in Costa Rica. I'm here now. I surf every morning. I find that that's great grounding. I'm in the ocean. I'm spending energy. I'm focusing, attending very acutely on what's going on in front of me at the time, because it's important to do that when you're out in the waves. And I also, in terms of what I do professionally, if I find that I'm procrastinating a lot, which is a very common symptom for us, maybe I'm just out of alignment with that. Maybe I'm not supposed to be doing that. Maybe I should be delegating that to somebody who's much better at it. So I try to manage what comes in, what goes out. One of the biggest practices has been just a meditative practice or a breathwork practice. I'm a Heart Math Institute trainer, so I work with people on heart-brain coherence and kind of getting that sorted out for people and getting them into a place where their body battery is charged and their resilience is more, they're ready for different challenges. So those have been helpful things for sure.
Okay, and I just want to go back to something that you said, and you were talking about delegating. Now, when you was building the business, it started to expand quite quickly. You was getting success, but you had issues taking on the financial side, so understanding the financial side of things. Mm-hmm. You could have easily, as money was coming through and things were expanding quite nicely, you could have delegated that to somebody else. What made you decide to educate yourself in an in-depth way to then take that on as well as a business, and then to go forward with that? Because you could have easily said, okay, my business is growing, I need someone in accounts to look after, be that freelancing for me on full time. So what made you think to yourself, no, I've got to take that on and I've got to educate myself going forward?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of answers to that. One, I did delegate it, but part of me felt the need to at least understand what my accountant was even telling me, or the reports that I was getting, right? But the truer answer, the more vulnerable answer, is that, and I know this is probably true with a lot of people with ADHD, but we have mistaken beliefs that we're not good enough in some way, right? Maybe because we've been told that throughout school or whatever, right? We're not progressing at the same rate of our peers or whatever it is. So I've always had this mistaken belief that I'm not quite enough when it comes to that. So of course, in my mind, the simple answer to that is, well, earn a terminal degree in that area, and then you'll have enough, right? So I think that's been a pattern for me, is maybe I'm not quite enough, I'm not quite smart enough, so you get a PhD, or my business isn't quite big enough, so you buy a company, whatever it is, right? You accumulate and you keep growing to satisfy or to address those mistaken beliefs that are hidden from the rest of the world.
But there's something that resonates with me, and something that's quite different, because there's a lot of people out there that would say, that's quite difficult, I'm just going to delegate that to somebody else. But you don't. You do the opposite. You take the challenge and you say, I can't do that now, but I can if I do this, and I'm going to do that. That makes you different. A lot of people would do it differently, but have you always been wired that way, or did something shift in your life to become that way?
Yeah, I don't know, but to be clear, I am a big delegator, so I'm very hands off in my business. I joke that I am truly the least important person there. If I were to die tomorrow, my business would go on just fine, wouldn't skip a beat, nobody would miss me, and that has been super important for me in terms of just, you know, my lifestyle, my enjoyment of it. Like I no longer want to be the central person, the person who has to answer every question, the person who has to be involved in everything. So, you know, I've taken delegation very seriously, and I've been so happy with the way it's worked out. But I think back then, you know, when I earned the doctoral degree, I was kind of fresh out of graduate school anyway. So going back to school seemed very normal and natural. I always had in my head that, you know, a PhD would be kind of a cool thing to have. I never intended to teach at a major university. I just thought it would be a cool thing to have, and the knowledge along the way would be really useful. But yeah, no, I've been a really aggressive delegator ever since, for sure.
Well, it works for you, and I'm good. I'm good on you. It works for you, and you knew exactly where you wanted to go with your life and how to live it. And I'm exactly the same way. As much as I'm interested in business, love business, etc., I want the freedom with my children, with my family, etc. That's more important to me than anything else. So you've done exactly what you needed to do to be happy within your life, and you know, I'm well done for that. What I want to do, I want to go back. Now you've got some hindsight. You found out later in the day that you had ADHD, but we never are armed with hindsight. So we're going to take that knowledge of you have your ADHD and all the traits that you have with that ADHD, and let's go right back to you now looking at yourself as a child thinking, aha, now that makes sense. How far can you go back and go, that's an ADHD trait that I have, and I didn't realize it when I was so much old. Be that 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, go right back. That things were said by family, friends, peers, whatever, yourself. How far back can you go that you can see those traits?
Yeah, I could go back to probably early primary school, first, second grade, something like that. It took me a long time to learn how to read. So that was very frustrating for me. But I remember, sitting in a class, and the teacher was, asking something. She asked a question about something we were supposed to have read, and I read it and I understood it, and that was like a breakthrough for me, because I'm like, oh wow, I'm actually getting this. I'm learning to read, and I just shouted out the answer, like just without raising my hand. I just shouted it out, and she kind of looked at me and laughed, in a very loving, polite way. And she's like, that's right, but next time, raise your hand or whatever, right? And that was like the first time I noticed that, I actually just impulsively shouted it out because I was so happy about it, Yeah. But if you want to go back to the traits, there is this idea of so in my case, it's impulsive hyperactive ADHD. There's also the inattentive type, which isn't me. But some of the research I've done at the university, and in the book that I wrote about this, is we looked at entrepreneurs, and we had them fill out a self-rating scale. So we kind of assessed their identification with ADHD traits. And then we asked them a bunch of questions about the business. And what we found was that in the context of entrepreneurship, ADHD is highly functional. The people in our survey, 500-person survey, very successful entrepreneurs with revenue exceeding $20 million and all this kind of stuff. Highly successful people, 60% of them identified with ADHD traits. Where in the general population, it's like 10 or 12, right? So they have these traits that lend themselves very uniquely to early stage startups. But on the flip side of that coin, they could be super harmful when they're not working well, right? So for example, one trait is, as we know, high propensity for risk. When it's working really well for you, you look brave and visionary, right? As the entrepreneur. When it's not working well for you, you look reckless and crazy, right? And we can go down the whole list of those. And on one side, it works really well. The other side, it's very harmful. But that we live in that dichotomy.
Totally. So you struggled with this through the years. Now with hindsight, we're looking at hindsight. You struggled with did you struggle with communicating in a particular way with people, be that with your parents, with people like Joe? How did your typical, I'm not even going to say typical day, I'm going to say, how did your typical ADHD week go as a child?
Yeah, and communication wasn't so much a problem, but getting the boring stuff done was a big problem, right? So like I could overperform and do really well in a subject that I liked, like science, always loved it, gravitated toward it. But you asked me to read a book when I was in middle school or high school, and forget it, right? It would take me forever. So yeah, I think I just put off the tasks and the assignments that I wasn't really interested in, not understanding, the importance. But, I was the type of students that, I was like, okay, well, what do I need to get a B? And I'm not going to do anything more than that. And that's what I'm getting, So my grades as a high school student were pretty underwhelming. Out of 500 people in my graduating class, I think I ranked right around 100. So I was solidly average, And even in undergraduate, maybe it was like a 3.1 or 3.2, wasn't anything stellar, wasn't terrible, but I just kind of said that this is a grade that's fine for me, and I'm going to do what I need to do to get that. I didn't really care about getting A's, right? I was more concerned with having fun and going out and doing the things I really like to do. And I sort of saw the assignments or the degree as just something I had to check off the list to do. But the value in it for me was the experience and the knowledge along the way, not so much the transcript.
No, I see that. So let's come to the nearer day where we are now. I'm interested in your book. How did that come about? And what is it all about, this book of yours? Yeah,
it grew out of the research that I helped with. So one of my colleagues at the university is a world-class academic in entrepreneurship. His papers have been cited more than most others. He's won awards for it. And he researches this link between ADHD and entrepreneurship. And, I just went to him one day with this idea to survey this population. And I said, hey, I'm sure ADHD is rampant. And he really loved the idea. So anyway, we did that study, which I kind of talked to you a little bit about with the traits. That turned into a TEDx talk. And once that went live, I was getting a lot of interest from, just people randomly finding my email and saying, hey, I watched your talk. It was amazing. Do you have anything else that could help me? Like, do you do coaching or anything? And I wasn't doing coaching. I didn't have anything else, but I found that I kept typing the same thing back to people over and over again. So I'm like, well, let me just write a book about it. So I wrote a book. It's called Lightning in a Bottle, How Entrepreneurs Can Harness Their ADHD to Win. And it's really about impulsive hyperactive ADHD, how in a context of entrepreneurship, that could be a huge advantage if you're able to manage the downside to let the upside flourish. And that book's been doing really well. It's been, I've gotten some nice feedback from it. Yeah.
And was that difficult to write? Did you feel like you was writing your biography?
No, not really so much a biography, because I didn't really want it to be that much about me. I wanted it to be more about the research and the study and that sort of thing. But I did find the book difficult to write only from a discipline perspective, right? Because I would go, I'd go a few days where I'd get a bunch of pages done, and then I might go a month or not necessarily a month, but a while without doing anything. And I kept beating myself up saying, I got to get back to it. So it wasn't until I planned out an entire week. I was like, okay, Monday through Friday, here's my schedule. I'm going to do these chapters this day, these chapters that day. And I literally did nothing else, but I got it done. And I purposely kept it short because it's targeted for those with ADHD. And I didn't want this to be a gigantic, dense book. So it's digestible. Like, I always say you could read through it in a transatlantic flight easily or a cross-country flight, no problem. So that was difficult. The harder part though was when my publisher said, hey, look, you really should record an audiobook. Okay. So I sat down, I can't even tell you how many times to start recording it. And I couldn't even get past the first couple chapters. I could not, I literally just couldn't do it. I don't know why it doesn't seem that difficult just to read your book into a microphone, but it was a very difficult task for me. So finally I just gave up on that, and I hired a professional voiceover artist to do it for me. And yeah, I know a lot of listeners prefer the author to read the book, but it never would have happened. So I just kind of took some of my own advice and delegated there. So, but that was the hard part, was the audio.
No, I tell you what, John, I feel you. It is a skill and a half. Doing voiceover, people think it's very easy, but obviously you went down that route and then you found not so much. And you did the right thing, you know. You wanted to do your book justice, right? And so you found someone that can do it justice, and that's the right way. So this book is available. I mean, how long ago did you write this book? How long has it been out?
So it's January 2021, so almost 4 years. Yeah, and you can get it on Amazon. If you just Google Lightning in a Bottle, my last name, you'll find it.
That's quite exciting. And do you think you'll do a follow-up for whatever reason?
Probably not. I doubt it. I mean, it's an interesting topic, but I think I've kind of exhausted my interest in writing about it.
Okay, I get it. But why don't you write a book about yourself? Because you've got an interesting journey. I mean, many people in how the hell did you scale so quickly having ADHD? And as much as we know, ADHD people have the potential to be great leaders, more so than, but a lot of people still who have ADHD or think they do are still got that mindset of it's not possible. So with that said, why not show your journey? And everybody will be so interested, because we're still thinking it's not possible. It'd be interesting because you did scale pretty fast, especially for a person that didn't even know they had ADHD, but you still did it. You still took yourself and got educated while having the business, and then you went on to lecture. How many people can say they can do that? That would actually help a huge amount of people out there that have neurodivergent, and not just ADHD, but it's autism, dyslexia, something similar. Think about it. I'd buy it. I'm amazed at your story, and I'm sure many other people, but think about it anyway. Just be surprising.
No, I appreciate it. I think part of it is that I just I find my own our own stories after a while get boring to us, right? And there's only so many times you can talk about it or write about it. But I do appreciate the idea of helping the next generation. So I feel like I do that in my role at the university, right? So I have this tremendous privilege to work with undergraduate and graduate students, and I think that's where I have that avenue, right? So I can help that, and a lot of students have ADHD. You can tell right away. So I do give back, I think, that way through my work. I just actually launched my own podcast back in November. It's called The Total Entrepreneur, Mind, Body, Spirit. And we talk to people who are subject matter experts in mental health, physical health, spiritual health, and everything around those edges. And we kind of break down some of the science and academic research and translate that into how to improve your entrepreneurial outcomes by prioritizing the ROI of your mental, physical, and spiritual health. So I think instead of a book, because you know what that's like, right? You got to put your head down, you got to type, you got to plan, versus like this medium is much more engaging. It's much more exciting for me anyway, right? So I think maybe there'll be enough material from the podcast transcripts to kind of create a book in the future. But for now, I'm really focused on having great conversations, sort of like this one too, but just with my guests and putting it out there for younger entrepreneurs to learn from.
Listen, that makes total sense. I mean, I've been doing the podcast now this year, and I've just started, but I feel like every time I have a conversation with someone, I go to university every single time, because you're actually following other people's paths, just like reading a book, right? You're actually accumulating their information, their experience. And I must admit, as much as I did it for two reasons, one is to help my kids who are autistic, to show that they can do and they can be successful, but I also did it for other people because I suffered for many years, and I didn't want anybody else to suffer. So that's one of the reasons why I did the podcast. But what I found out on my journey of doing the podcast, the amount of actual intelligence I get from it by having just simple conversations is just ridiculous. There is no way I could learn what I've learned, and to have the empathy added, because I'm quite an empathetic person, but because I'm taking on those backgrounds and those stories, and you start to semi-live that, and it just amazes me how much you learn. So you're totally right. When you're going down the podcast route, you feel like what you're doing is enough, because if you scale the podcast, you reach out far enough. You're doing things in a dynamic way, right? And you're having conversations with 1, 2, 3 people all together, and you're melding together with all that information that you could never get out of a book, because it's dynamic. Right. So I get the feeling. I love engaging. Hence why, John, I said to you, and I'm sure it shocked you, listeners, as I say to everybody before I have that conversation and come on the podcast, I said to John, I don't have a clue what you do, right? I don't know. And there's a few people that look shocked and go, what? But by doing that, we have a natural conversation, and it goes in the direction it needs to go, rather than when you've got structured questions and it's always going to be rigid and it'll always just fit in that box. And I don't want that. I want to hear how people have actually lived and how they got round, because everybody's dynamic and everyone's unique. And I need that uniqueness every time. And I want my listeners to hear the unique, because we're all supposed to be different. We're not supposed to be the same. So that conversation is very important. So so I get you when you say, no, I'm doing the podcast and I'm pretty happy where I am now. And you want to focus on it. And you're doing great, John. Thanks for that. Okay, when it comes to your business, so you've got your business doing its own thing at the moment, and you're focused on that. You're educating people and you're loving that. And also, when you know that you're helping disabled children, etc., you're loving that. So you're doing the podcast and you're definitely loving that. Now, I know you've got a plan. What could be down the road beyond this?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the company, at some point, I'd like to transition to employee ownership. I think that would be a really amazing thing if the employees can own the business. It would give us a competitive advantage too, because we compete with nonprofits, hospitals, and schools that can't offer that. So I think that would be kind of cool. But yeah, I'm gonna run this podcast thing out for as long as it still is fun. And I've probably got another 5 to 10 years in me at the university before I want to pack that in as well. And maybe live more of the year in Costa Rica, so I can surf and eat, whole fresh food and get vitamin D, all that kind of thing, right? But yeah, who knows? I think I'm finally at a point in my life where I'm pretty satisfied. Like, when you're younger and you're scaling and you're hungry and aggressive, you never quite feel satisfied. But I think right now I feel pretty good, and I'm not reaching for more. I'm just appreciating what is right now, and that's a really amazing feeling.
Yeah, you're pretty serene at the moment, aren't you?
Yeah,
I can hear it in your voice. So what keeps you grounded within your life? And what I mean by that, some people, they have a certain thread going through their life. That thread could be religion, it could be a relative, it could be something that they've actually gone through a certain pain in their life and they thought, no, that's never going to happen to me again. What is that thread that keeps you grounded and keeps you focused, going in a direction that you want to go in?
I think for me, it's the idea, I've got this, not obsession, but an interest in physical longevity and health span over lifespan. Right. So for me, I want to make sure that however long I'm here, I'm living a healthy and vital life. Like, I don't want to live to be 110 if my last 20 years are being bedridden and dealing with chronic disease. Right. However, if I could live that long and be vital and healthy and still do the things I like to do, Yeah, bring it on, right? So I think I'm very focused on my health span over my lifespan. And so that really, and I've been like that most of my life, either as an athlete or, whatever. But I think, just, making sure I'm managing what I'm drinking, what I'm eating, what I'm doing, fostering community, and, reading as much as I can about how to increase health span and get more vitality out of the years that I'm here.
Yeah.
I think that's been really important for me, and that's been a wonderful focus for the past 10 years or so.
So you're quite a spiritual person, can I say?
Yeah. So, yes. So, I mean, not religious. I mean, I was raised Roman Catholic. I'm since recovered from that. But no, I do believe I'm part of something bigger. I'm part of the one field. So there is a spiritual element for sure. That includes, my meditations, the way I approach things. But yes, there is a spiritual element for sure.
I'm very similar. I'm a Buddhist myself, and that keeps me going. And the way I tend to keep focus, and I use that in the meditation and chanting. So I get that, and that keeps me rooted. So I get you, and I feel you. But John, you've had a wonderful journey, and I know there's so much more to it that we could speak about. But we're very limited on time. So with that said, what just one thing that could help the listeners out there that are neurodivergent for them to go forward within their lives? One thing you can leave them with.
Take a look at what you're good at and focus on that, right? So if you've got ADHD or whatever it is, you've got some major strengths. And you've got strengths compared to your peers that are quite strong. They don't have them the same way you do. So take a look at those and find your way to a passion or a profession or a career that lets you tap into those. At the same time, recognize that those strengths that you have, the other side of those strengths are major liabilities and weaknesses in some ways, right? So make sure that you're managing the downside so that the upside can flourish. But if you just take an inventory of the things you like to do and the things you're good at, and you focus on those, you'll probably do much better than your peers that don't have any kind of neurodiversity.
I hear you and I feel you. Now, one other thing, what do you want to leave us with that we may have missed? What is it that we need to know about you, or connection, or whatever? Have we missed anything in this conversation?
No, this was really great. I mean, if people are interested in learning more, they can find me on LinkedIn. My website is just johntorrens.com. You can find my book, Lightning in a Bottle, on Amazon. I've got a TEDx talk there too. So that's really it. If people are interested in learning more about my work, they can find me there.
And everybody, as you can see, we briefly just skimmed over his experience, and it goes, I'm telling you, far more than we've skimmed over. Go to his podcast. I'll put all the information down there. That's the podcast, his book, and his contact details. So please go and listen there, because I know without listening to it, it's going to hold a lot of gold, because I'm going to have a sniff over. Don't tell him, but I'm going to have a sniff over his podcast and check it out. But don't say nothing to him. And with that said, John, thank you for sharing your precious time. We really do appreciate you.
My pleasure. Really great to meet you, Eli, and thanks for the conversation.
No, it's our pleasure for sure. And listeners, do the usual thing: subscribe, like. Any feedback, any ways that the podcast could be improved. I like constructive criticism. I mainly like constructive criticism because it's the only way to improve in life. So I'm all cool with that. In the meantime, sayonara.